Welcome. Community Connections. Checking to make sure you're in the right place. We're doing a presentation on preparing your garden for spring with Miss Cindy. I'm going to say it wrong.
Wedel. Yes.
I was very close. Very Wedel. Okay. Anyway, she is the Director of Service Excellence, Coaching and Consulting. Doesn't have anything to do with gardening, but it sounds really cool. And she's been at Vanderbilt for 4 years. But just in case you're a little nervous because she's not working in the greenhouse here, she has been gardening in the South for over 28 years. She has a family history of gardening. It's in her blood. She is a past president of the Middle Tennessee Perennial Plant Society, and she is a master gardener, which I think sounds really cool. So she's going to give you information on preparing your garden for spring. But before she starts, I have to give you the Community Connections commercial. We are a group that came out of the University Staff Advisory Council, and we work hand in hand with the Med Center Staff Advisory Council. And our purpose is to find ways to get you all together and bring a little joy into your life and bring some fun stuff into the work day, since we spend most of our working hours there. We have an email address, Community Connections. We have a website that you can get to. Just search Community Connections. We're off of the University Staff Advisory Council website. Hopefully, we'll be posting this video soon on our website. We have some past ones. So, that's the end of the commercial, except that we really love to hear from you. So if you have ideas, let us know. But for what you're really here for, Miss Cindy.
Thank you. I spent last week in bed with bronchitis, so this is not my normal voice. And I will do everything that I can not to cough. But if you will forgive me for my very strange, my department calls this my low, sexy Lauren Bacall voice. But it is not my usual voice. We're going to go ahead and post these pictures on the website. So I'm going to download the presentation. The pictures don't project quite as well, so I really want you to get excited about the plants, and you can look at them on the Community Connections website. So I've already gotten a great introduction. I was born and raised in Michigan. 28 years ago, I saw the errors of my ways and moved south of the Mason-Dixon line and learned that I knew nothing about gardening. And if any of you have moved from one zone to another in your career, you find that suddenly you go from being an expert to a novice, like that. So I'm going to share with you my 28 years of accumulated knowledge here in Middle Tennessee. I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things we do in Middle Tennessee to prepare for spring. I want to share with you some plants that I love that do well in this climate, and they may be plants that you're familiar with, but I may surprise you with something that you've never seen before. So, first question here is, anybody know what that bloom is? No. It's a witch hazel. It's a witch hazel blossom. It is a beautiful blossom. Actually, there are some witch hazels that are blooming here on the university. We have a great, wonderful botanical garden to learn from here, and I'll reference some of the things. You can actually see these blooms right outside of Medical Center North, sort of in the entrance that goes to the executive suite. So they are blooming right now. This one happens to be a very close-up of a bloom. These are very small blooms. You want to plant a witch hazel someplace close, because if you put it at the back of your yard, you'll think it never blooms, and that's just because you're not close enough to see it. So that's a witch hazel. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. So let's go to the next slide. You know, astronomically, what is spring? Well, spring, according to the astronomical clock, starts on March 20th and ends on June 19th. But I would argue spring is where you live. That really is, you know, the calendar. You flip the calendar to March and you see the 20th and it says spring starts, and that may or may not mean anything. This is what spring looks like back home where I'm from. They just had about 5 more inches of snow over the weekend, so spring is a long ways away from happening. These are some crocuses that were blooming in my yard the 1st of February. And if you go far enough south, you could actually get into all kinds of blooms. So it depends upon where you are. So for that reason, what I want to do today is talk about my definition of spring as it relates to Middle Tennessee. Next slide, please. So I've kind of divided this presentation up by months. And on your green sheet, you have basically 3 months worth of activities in front of you. And they roughly correspond to what I've described here. Early spring for me is really February. Actually, I kind of consider we've already spent a month in spring. And until about early March, sometimes the second week of March. And then I kind of figure that we go into what I call the middle spring, which to me is kind of like true spring here. Things start blooming. We get excited. We go to Lowe's. We buy plants. They die. We go back to Lowe's later. I'll talk to you about my thoughts about that because I grew up in a plants family, so I have some strong feelings about big box realtors. But I'll tell you, I do buy from them occasionally. So middle March to April is what I call mid-spring. And then for us, late spring is in May. Now again, growing up in the snowy north, my birthday is May 7th. I've seen snow on my birthday in May 7th in Michigan. So it's all relative. But here, you're pretty much on the backside of spring when you start getting into May. The heat's starting to come. And so really, middle spring is kind of here. Anybody know what this plant is? Snowdrops. I'm going to talk about snowdrops, one of my favorite plants. Everybody probably knows hyacinths and daffodils. No surprises there. Over on the right, cherry blossoms. Happened to take that in Washington, D.C., so it's not here, but it was a pretty picture, and so I decided to use it. So, spring. Let me just take a quick look at my notes. Now, we learned from the astronomical clock, my second slide, that, June is still considered spring. So, next slide. So, this is my thought about June. Is it June? Not for me. Spring's not June for me. In Nashville, spring in June is about heat, humidity, chiggers, and mosquitoes. So I plan to have all of my gardening done by Memorial Day. So you may call it spring, I call it hot. And so most of what I'm going to talk to you about is going to be related to the fact that spring in Middle Tennessee really is pretty much done by Memorial Day. And what you need to be doing is pretty much done by then. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about tasks for February, and this is in the middle section of your handout. And so everything that's there is pretty much written down. And you can see that for February, if you didn't clean your gardens up in the fall, which I hope you did, but if you didn't, then February is the time that you want to do that. See, and it's leap year, right? So you've still got 24 hours. You get all this done. And then you're good for March. So it's really cleaning up, it's raking, it's getting up dead stuff, and just kind of tidying up. It is also the time to weed. You can weed now and do a little bit of weeding, or you can weed later and do a lot of weeding. So I like to look at February as a chance to get out into the yard, get the first weeds that are coming up, get some kind of a pre-emergent weed killer down. Pruning is the one that I happen to use. And get that kind of roughed into the beds and then get my mulch down. And if you do that on your established beds, then what you're fighting in the rest of spring is minimal weeds. Because you've already done the two things that are going to prevent weeds. You've put down your pre-emergent and you've put your mulch down. Will you have weeds? Yeah, you'll have some weeds, but you should have significantly less weeds than if you don't do that. Question? The pre-emergent that I use is called Preen, P-R-E-E-N, and there's others. It's not the only one. It just is the one that you see often in the big box stores. I usually buy it at Costco because you can get it in these giant things, and as you'll see in a minute, I have a giant garden, so it all works out. And then the thing I would say to you is February is a wonderful time to stop and look at your yard and say, what does it look like right now? And what do I hope that it will look like next year? It's a great time to go out and take pictures. I try to take pictures about once a month in my garden all the way through the year so I have a good sense of what am I seeing. Because then when I make decisions about planting in the future, I've got those pictures and I know what I'm looking at. So let's look at the next slide. All right, so I'm going to show off. This is my yard, and it was February 1st. We got the mulch down. We got the weeds up, pre-emergence underneath there, and we are pretty much ready to go. Now, the other thing that this tells me is it tells me there are some plants that I'm going to want to add to. This is not my whole garden. You're not seeing one side of it, but I can see that I've got some primroses going on. I've got some snowdrops, some crocuses coming up. Back here are some hellebores, which we'll talk about. So I see already that there's kind of a blank slate right here that I'm probably going to want to work with next year. So again, looking at the garden should in fact help you think about next year. Because if you're a gardener, you probably need to be thinking about 12 months ahead of yourself to get ready. One other thing I will tell you, and I don't know how well this is projecting. It is not projecting well at all, so I apologize. I'm using pine straw down here, and I'm using shredded hardwood mulch up here. I just tend to switch up mulches, and we can talk about that later. Use whatever you like. Please don't use rubber mulch. Just do that for me. Don't use that rubber mulch, okay? Next slide. So let's talk about some plants for a February garden. Again, I'll give you a few ideas. You'll see on the far right of your handout, I've listed a whole bunch of things that should be blooming in your garden this time of year. Some of them you're probably familiar with, like crocus and pansies and daffodils. We've already talked about witch hazel. There are some confused quinces and forsythias out there right now that are trying to decide whether it's really spring or not. And again, depending upon the eco-climate in your yard, you may have something blooming and your next door neighbor may not, because you have all kinds of zones in your garden, some warm, some cool, some in the middle. So one of my favorite plants, it's a bulb. It's a snowdrop. It is the first plant you are likely to see in Middle Tennessee in the spring. It naturalizes very nicely. This is a close-up of it. This, I would tell you, is probably a more natural-looking plant. This one I have, these snowdrops are actually coming up through lily turf or monkey grass, as you may know it. So it looks a lot more green here. These are not all the green leaves of this plant. In fact, this is more like what the plant looks like right there. Wonderful plant. A lot of times you'll find them naturalized. My first snowdrops, I jumped the fence in my neighbor's vacant yard. They had moved and left, and so I dug up some of their snowdrops because they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. These do multiply, so don't go out and buy 1,000 of these because you'll have plenty if you buy 20 and let them naturalize. So a great little plant. It's the first sign of spring in Tennessee, and it's just fun to look in the backyard and see those. So let's go on to our next slide. If you don't walk out of here convinced that you need a hellebore, then I haven't done my job. Now, people either love these things or they hate them. They're called Lenten roses. They're called hellebores. I love them because they are out now. My yard is full of flowers. They've gotten a bad rap because there is a genus of this particular plant that's called a stinking hellebore. It doesn't smell, and so people always think about the stinking hellebore and say, oh, you don't want these in your yard. Here's why you want these in your yard. One, they're evergreen. So they are going to be around a long time. Their leaves about this time of year in February start looking a little raggy, but we're going to cut those down because all the new leaves are coming up. I had hellebores up right around the 1st of February. Some of the hellebores, older hellebores, have drooping heads to them, and so a lot of people say, well, I don't like them because I can't see the flower very well. The flower tends to go down to the ground, but now with the new hybrids, they're hybridizing these so that their little heads are starting to stand up. Some really incredible ones. This is a purple one that's in my yard. It's a great plant. This is a close-up of a pink hellebore. And then this is one called Ivory Prince. And again, this you're not getting the great look of this plant, but a beautiful plant on reddish pink stems. And so again, these plants, A, come up incredibly early. B, they have winter foliage. So you're going to look out in your backyard and see something green. And they do persist through the season. So if you go to the next slide, this was taken about 3 weeks ago. This is Hellebore. You know that purple one that I showed you that was open? I took that last week. And this is what that plant looked like 3 weeks ago. So the blooms were just beginning to open. You can see them up here. And so here you've got the Snowdrops, and you've got a nice Hellebore going on here. So they're great plants. You can sometimes find these in the big box stores. I'm going to put a pitch in for the Perennial Plant Society plant sale in just a little bit, and I know they will have Hellebores there. So just an idea of combinations. Now, this is up near a waterfall that I have on my property, and you see a plant marker here. So let's go to the next slide because I'm going to show you that plant marker again, and again, not the greatest picture here, but that plant marker was marking this hosta that's right there. And so here is that Hellebore in June. You've still got blooms on it. They're beginning to fade, so they're a little on the gray, light blue kind of side right now, but they're still persisting, and those will hang on, probably clip them down sometime in the early part of June when they start looking a little raggy. But that evergreen look will persist for the whole year. So a great plant. No, all of the plants that I'm going to show you today are plants that any of us can plant, because I hate to come in and talk to you about plants that are giant and have, 10 pounds of dirt attached to them. These are small plants. You can get them in 3 or 6 inch pots. And the thing that they do like is they don't like to have their feet wet. They like to be on the dry side. And so I have irrigation, and so I tend to plant them away from irrigation heads because they don't like wet feet. But I have these all over the yard. And so this happens to be on top of a waterfall, so it's a very dry area, okay? So I wanted to show you what that plant was going to look like and how it will persist through several seasons for you. Next slide. This is a shady part, and Hellebores are going to want some shade. So if you don't have a shady garden, I would tend to plant them on like the north side of your property where they're going to get a little more shade. They will do much better in the shade. The Snowdrops that I talked about, doesn't matter. They can be sunny or shady, and they will pretty much be gone. As a matter of fact, mine are looking pretty miserable right now. They're starting to go the other way. Okay, so what's Wednesday is March, is that right? So if you can't get all those things done in the next 24 hours, then here's what you need to focus on for March. And again, most of this is listed in your, on your green handout. You're going to complete the February list. So if all the things we talked about, weeding and mulching and cleaning up dead plants, you're going to do that. If you didn't get it done in February, you want to do it in early March. The longer you wait, the more weeds you have. So the sooner you get out there and tackle those weeds, get that pre-emergent down, the better off you're going to be. Get your mulch down. Now you won't watch your plants come up. You do not want to put pre-emergent down if you're going to open up a new bed. So if you have some grand plan for a new bed of plants, you do not want to mess with pre-emergent there. I'll weed it. I'll put some mulch down to keep the weeds down, but I'm not going to put the pre-emergent down because that can sometimes mess with your plants depending upon the kinds of plants you're trying to put in the ground. If you want to open up a new bed, this is a great time to have your soil tested. You've got a new bed, you're not sure. Sometimes you can have one soil type in one part of your garden, and you can turn 50 feet and be in the other, another kind of soil as well. So if you want to open up a new bed, get some soil testing done. I want you to attend some local gardening events during the month of March. I've listed a few of them there. And of course, the biggest one is the Lawn and Garden Show that's coming up this weekend. It's a great place to go get inspired. And then after you come back from the garden show, I want you to read this 4 times. Resist the temptation to plant. And when you go to bed, you say to yourself, resist the temptation to plant, okay? Because there is a reason why all the plant societies are selling their plants in April. They're not selling them in March, okay? There's well, you can buy them in March. You can put them in the ground in March, and you can replant them in April. We're going to talk about frost dates. So we're all excited. Today's a beautiful day, and we're ready to go dig up our beds and put all kinds of plants in. And you can, in March, kind of get some hardy perennials in the ground. You know, Hellebores will go in the ground and be just fine. They like cold weather anyway. But anything that's tender and any annual at all, just don't do it. Don't do it to yourself. So attend some local gardening events. Lawn and Garden Show, you can buy plants there. If you buy plants there, know that you're going to need to keep them safe inside, either in a garage that's temperate or in your house where it's not super warm. But those babies are going to kind of have to be kept alive for a few weeks. But I know it's tempting. So if you need to, you can certainly buy bare-rooted plants. You can buy twigs and shrubs and those kinds of things and get them in the ground without any trouble. But don't buy tender annuals because you'll be unhappy. The native plant sale is the end of this month at Cheekwood. I'm going to show you a native in just a minute that I love in my garden during the month of March. And that is a really cool sale. It's a very small sale, though. And they do that to benefit the Howe Wildflower Garden at Cheekwood. I don't know how many of you have been to Cheekwood. I'm a garden guide at Cheekwood, and so I love Cheekwood dearly, and I would encourage you to go out there once or twice because it's a great place to learn about new plants and to see what's out there. So the March 31st is when the native plant sale is going to be, and if you're really into natives, and those are those things that last like, 4 weeks, and then they're gone, and you go, where to go? And it'll be back again. But natives are a wonderful thing to get into if you really want to naturalize your garden. Then the Daffodils Show is at Cheekwood on April, the end of March, first part of April. How many genuses of daffodils and narcissus are there? Anybody know? Like 7 different classes. So if you think you know daffodils, I'm promising you, you don't know daffodils. I don't know daffodils. There's a daffodil society here. If you really want to get interested and excited about daffodils, go to that show because you'll see there are daffodils that bloom in February here, in March, in April. And so if you get early, middle, and late blooming daffodils, you can have daffodils for 3 months in Middle Tennessee. Now, they're not the kind you're probably going to get at the big box. You're going to have to order them, but you can get a wide variety of daffodils. Okay, so that's March. So let's look at some plants.
Can I ask one question?
Certainly.
Get your soil tested?
Soil tested, you can get that from the University of Tennessee. And so if you look at their website, they actually have a local office here, and they will give you a little box, and they pay you, I think it's $6 now for a test. And you go out into your garden and scoop up some dirt, and they will test it for you and send you a report. And you'll know more about your dirt than you ever wanted to know. It's a little bit like My Health at Vandy when you look at your lab results. Okay? So here's a favorite plant of mine, primroses. Anybody here grow primroses? I love primroses too. They're sort of the circus plant of the garden in the spring because they come in all these crazy different colors, and they're cold hardy. They're perennial, so I have them all year round. I had a yellow one, which is not on the slide here. I had a yellow one that bloomed in December. It was just crazy. It would just bloom, bloomed. And it's just now starting to go away. The blooms are. This is a blue one that's out in the garden right now, a red one. I show you this primrose because it is a little different. You can't get these. You have to order these. But it's actually what's called a drumstick primrose. So it's on a longer stem, about a 6 to 7 inch stem. And that just gives you a little different look. These lay very close to the ground. They multiply, so after about 2 or 3 years, you can fork them up, tease those little babies apart, and get yourself some more primroses. But they love cool weather, and they will subsist. Really, they'll bloom for the next month or so. In the summer, they go dormant, meaning the green will be there, but you won't get any blooms during the summer. And then once the cool weather comes, they perk right back up again. So they're a great little plant. I love them. And again, a lot of color in a small space.
Do they do well in the shade?
Yes, they do well in the shade. And these particular plants, this is one time that I probably will send you to the big box store. There are occasions when I go to the big box store. Those of us in the Perennial Plant Society and the Master Gardeners, you know, talk secretly about what's at Lowe's and what's at Home Depot right now. If you get those plants when they first come off the truck, I mean, we're talking the day they come off the truck, you can get some really pretty nice plants. The problem is that once they're there for a while, they don't get well taken care of, and so they get leggy and they get weak and they get yellow and they just don't look good. But primroses are a plant, I get them at Lowe's. I usually have some percentage of dieback every year. I'll lose a plant or two, just age. They only last so long. And so I'll just keep my eyeballs peeled for when I see them over at Lowe's, and I'll run down there and grab a few just to fill in some blank spots. So they're real hardy. The leaves are very rigid. They're not a tender plant. You can't hurt them getting them in the ground. So that's a recommendation for a plant in March. And let's take a look at another one. Anybody grow Celadon Poppies? Ah, yes. We love Celadon Poppies. We love Celadon Poppies. This is a native. It is, well, it's actually not a native. It's from the Orient, but it is, you'll see this in a wildflower garden, in a natural garden setting. A beautiful yellow plant. I know they'll have some of these at the Perennial Plant Society. They always do. Has very fern-like foliage. You can see it up here. And it tends to be low to the ground, and then it will send up multiple shoots with these beautiful kind of buttercuppy looking flowers up at the top. A couple of weeks maybe in the garden. They are self-seeding. This is another one you don't need to buy a lot because you'll have a lot sooner or later. You can actually see this little guy is a seed pod, so the bloom has already fallen off, and that'll pop open and throw seed, and then you'll end up with more of these guys. So sometimes called a woodland poppy, a wood poppy, or a celadon poppy. Very wonderful little flower in the garden. And again, they're not going to bloom for a long period of time, but they sure are pretty when they're up. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. Another favorite plant of mine, Iberus, also known as Candytuft. Anybody grow Candytuft? Oh yeah, we've got some gardeners here. Okay, Candytuft. What do I like about this plant? It's starting to bloom now. I've got some that's close to a rock wall, and there's enough heat coming off of that rock wall that it's going to start to push the blooms. But this is typically a plant you'll see in March. It's evergreen. You can grow it in a bed like this, and it is going to have year-round interest because after the blooms are done, you're going to have an evergreen plant to look at. You can usually get a second bloom off of these. Have most of you, those of you that grow it, get a second bloom? I usually go out with my garden shears, hedge clippers, you know, these kind, not electric, but the old scissor kind. And once these blooms start to go away, I'll give them a good strong haircut, take them down, and I'll usually get a second rebloom on them a little later in the spring. Pardon? Well, I will wait until, you know how these start to look like they go to seed, so they lose their petals, and then they've got the little seed pods. That's the point that I go out, and I just literally take them right down to the green. And so I'm not particularly fussy about it. I just stand out there and just whack. And you'll usually get a second bloom on these if you do that. In the spring. Yeah, later spring, right. So this is a great little plant. It's got year-round interest. Again, all I'm trying to do is show you some things that you might not have thought about. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll see all of the usual suspects over here. You know, March is when we start seeing so many of our daffodils. We see our hyacinths. We'll start to see tulips. I grew up not far from Holland, Michigan, tulip capital of the United States. I do not plant tulips anymore. I have fed enough squirrels in my life. They do tend to, you kind of almost have to treat them like annuals, really. You might get a second year bloom on a tulip, but it's kind of spotty. So if you plant 12, you might get 6 on the second year. So you just treat them as if you look at Cheekwood and those kinds of places, they just dig them up and throw them away because you're just better off just planting them once a year in the fall. So I'm not a big fan of tulips. I am a giant fan of daffodils because the squirrels don't chew them up. They multiply. So they're a nice bulb, kind of easy to take care of. Other things that I've put on here, grape hyacinths, that's fairly common. Now the quince and forsythia really should be out during the month of March. The confused ones have probably either dropped or been hit by some kind of cold weather, and now the later blooms are coming on to those kinds of things. So those are my thoughts about plants for March. Yes? They're probably crowded. Daffodils will send off little side bulbs, and after a while that they tend to get overcrowded. And so what I do, and you can certainly do this in the spring, I've not had a problem doing this, take your pitchfork, fork them up, because you can see where the green is, divide those bulbs, and get those bulbs spread out into a larger area, and they'll rejuvenate. Now, there's a point when you start digging those up, if they're really, really kind of looking old and wrinkly and maybe small, you might throw those smaller ones away and just keep the larger bulbs. But they do benefit from a division about every 4 or 5 years, I guess. Yeah. Irish. To hide 3 things that I interplant with daffodils to hide the ugly. Well, pansies will typically persist after the daffodils go down, and depending upon how much heat we have. But with early daffodils, if you put pansies in the bed, those will usually persist until those ugly yellow things go away. And I have seen people put allium in. Allium is good because it starts sending up its own green shoots a little later than the daffodils. So you're going to get some purple color from an allium, and that'll kind of serve to hide those. I just think it's God's way of teaching us to be patient. And so some people do elaborate hairdos with their daffodil leaves. They braid them, they weave them. Well, other people just leave them to, spread out. I don't know that there's any one or right way to do it. Sometimes I've got some that are pretty close to a garden path, so I'll do a little hair weave on those just to keep them off the stepping stones. But allium is one. Pansies, if it's an early blooming daffodil, would be another good example. I've seen ajuga used as well, because ajuga will start sending up its flowers. Yeah, people either like ajuga or they don't. Ajuga's a weed to some people. Yes, okay, so depending upon whether you have a lot of it or not. If you went to the garden center and paid money for it, it's a plant. If you dig it up, it's a weed. Just depends upon your perception of a plant. Let's go to the next slide. April. Whew, April's here. April's spring. Great things are happening. So now it's time to start planting both hardy, woody perennials and regular perennials. It's time to start thinking about annuals. Because our frost date here is April 15th. Now, this is the point in time, early April, where you will go to the big box stores and you will see every kind of plant known to mankind, and they are coming off the trucks like crazy. And I watch people with Boston ferns on April 2nd, and I'm saying, they'll be back. Hope they didn't spend too much money on those, because you just can't predict whether you're going to get a frost in April. And frankly, I have found that if you plant too early in April, the ground is so cold that everybody just sits there waiting for the ground to get warm, So you may survive a frost, but those plants aren't going to flourish until that ground temperature comes up. And so that's one of the reasons that I tend to wait until the end of April before I start messing too much with plants. Okay, so what are you going to do? Well, this is the point in time you're going to get out there, you're going to dig up those new beds. You've already had your soil tested. You've gotten the results back. You're now trying to figure out what it means, although usually at the bottom they tell you if you should add something after you've had your soil tested. And you're starting to dig them up. You're getting them laid out the way you want them. And now I want you to go support your local plant societies. So let's look at the next slide. This is on your handout in the middle, April 14th. Middle Tennessee Perennial Plant Society. About 7,000 plants, about, put together by the Perennial Plant Society of Middle Tennessee. They know plants. They know great plants. They have people in little aprons that are there to help you. They have their plants divided into into shade plants and sun plants. They have little signs above all of their plants that show you what that plant looks like. And most importantly, you're supporting a good cause, because that's how they make their money for their society. So the doors open, what, at 9, is that right? 9. Yes, people start lining up at 7. You need to be there by, if you're not, well, the real diehards are there at 7. The doors open at 9. 8 o'clock, I'd get there. Bring your coffee. Stand in line. They give away coupons, free coupons. They do little drawings so you can get free plants. And then the doors open, and then there's just this mad rush. And usually by about noon, it's all over. It's over. It's done. Finished. If you're a late riser, you don't want to go this, because there won't be much left. So, great place to buy perennials. Those Celadon Poppies that I was talking about, they're going to be there. They're going to have lots of the kinds of plants that are different, unusual. And again, there's people there that are going to help you select your plants. Next slide. Another society I want to give some support to is the Williamson County Master Gardeners. They put on Bloom and Garden Expo down at the Ag Park in Franklin. It is on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So this is your big weekend, see? Like you either go Friday to Bloom and Garden, and then you get up first thing in the morning, and you go over to the plant sale, and then you can go back to Bloom and Garden and get whatever you didn't get there. Now, Bloom and Garden, and I've just put some pictures up here to show you, they sell a lot of plants there. They have a lot of vendors that sell plants. That's usually where I get my vegetable plants. There's a couple vendors there that I happen to like, and I get my vegetable plants there, and off goes that piece of paper. We'll just let that be. Don't worry. And again, they not only sell plants, but they've got yard art, and they've got tools, and they've got people selling mulch and stone and all kinds of landscaping sorts of things. And so notice, when are these plant societies selling their plants? April. Yes, because April is when you want to plant. I also want to give a little pitch to the Herb Society. They're listed here. The Herb Society has their sale on April 21st, and I don't know where they're going to have it this year. Probably at the fairgrounds, I'm thinking. Both the Perennial Plant Society and the Herb Sale. So if you're an herb person, it's a much smaller sale, but it is a very nice sale, and they have some very unusual herbs. So if you like herbs, that's a great place to go, okay? So April, we got it figured out, right? Okay. It's going to be at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. And if you Google the Herb Society on their webpage, they'll have all the details. Okay, let's do another slide. I don't know what's coming next. Oh, May. Here we go. Tasks for May. Well, now May is really when I start getting those tender annuals out. The little annual plants, you know, the ones that only live this year. Now, again, all things are relative. I have some good friends who live in New Orleans, and they came up one May, and I was planting impatiens in the ground. And they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I've got to get my impatiens in the ground." And they said, "You've got to get them in the ground." And I said, "Yeah, we have to plant them every year." And they were like, "You have to plant those every year?" And if you go to New Orleans, their impatiens are about this big because it's just a plant that grows year-round. So everything is relative in a gardener's life. And so annuals, I'm talking about petunias, I'm talking about lantana, I'm talking about things that are going to get killed by the frost. You will dig them up and you will do it again next year, okay? So, tender annuals. And again, this is really, May for me is I'm getting the rest of my plants in the ground, okay? This is my planting season right now. I want to be done by Memorial Day. Why? Number 4, the skeeters are coming, okay? Skeeters are coming. You want to be done planting by the end of May. It's going to get hot. It's going to get humid. You're going to get chigger bites. Why would you want to be out there? You want everything in the ground. Let's look at the next slide. You want to be finished. So these are some pictures that, again, will show up a little bit better on the website. But, you know, this is the point, you know, that May is just everything. May is spring here. Everything that you can think of is blooming. And so it's a wonderful time to be out in the yard. But again, you want to do it in May. Enjoying the garden. Will you go back one slide, because I missed something I just want to talk about. This couple of things here I skipped over. You know, this is a good time to get your planter boxes and your pots put together. Get those watered in real good so you're ready to roll. Finish up with any planting. I am not a huge fertilizer person. There's nothing wrong with fertilizer. I just sort of believe that, you know, God put stuff in the ground, and if there's something missing, then I probably need to add a fertilizer. But as long as my plants are doing okay, I don't typically fertilize. Now, if I've got a plant that looks a little yellow, looks like probably it needs some iron, then I might take care of that. But I don't generally, I'm not one of those go out with the Miracle Grow and, you know, Miracle Grow everything. Although you can grow some big plants if you Miracle Grow on a regular basis. You can have some begonias up to here. So again, you want that mulch down. So now let's go 2 forward. And that's what my yard looks like in June. So that's after it's all kind of in. This is a shade garden. You can see I've got a couple of planters here, lots of hostas, because hostas are just one of the things I do. But that's what June is for me. Done. You're done. Let's go to the next slide. I'm just bragging now. Okay, this is the view from the screened-in porch. Skeeters are coming. I'm in the porch. Got the waterfall going. You can see we've got our, you can't really see it very well here. We've got lots of ferns. We've got some astilbe. We've got hosta. That's that garden shed that you saw in the back. So it's pretty much kind of disappeared from here. But basically, June, you should be done. Just be done. Just enjoy it. Now you got to water it to keep it alive. That's what you'll do the rest. You know, that's summer. Summer is just like, how much can my water bill be? And so my question for you is, do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
So I'm interested in just doing a small vegetable plot that I do. So if you could, I guess, comment on construction of raised beds in general, and specifically, like it's going to be on a bit of a hill, and I follow the natural line of terrain, but I want to make that level.
I'd make it level, because if you start following the natural terrain, you're going to have a runoff issue. So you might as well get yourself a nice flat bed and not have to, you know, build it up on one side. And I have become a pretty big raised bed gardener because I don't know about you, but where I live, when I got here 28 years ago, people would sing this song, and I thought it was about UT football. Rocky Top, yes. And I quickly learned, I had a guy come to plant a tree in my yard, and I said, I want the tree right here. And he said, ma'am, we're going to put the tree as close to there as we can. Might be over there, might be over there. Because I live in Westmead. And so I garden with a pickaxe, a crowbar, and a shovel. Because it's all about removing the rocks to create the holes. So I have become a raised bed fan. It is a very easy way to grow vegetables, particularly because you're going to pull them up anyway. If I'm growing perennials, I'm probably going to, you know, grin and bear it and get out there with my shovel and my pickaxe, because I want those plants to be in the ground. But raised beds would be a great way to go for vegetables. Different people have different approaches. What I would suggest you do is go on the web and look at raised beds. And it is amazing. I have hundreds and hundreds of gardening books, and I'm finding myself more and more typing in something like, show me how to make a raised bed, and there's a YouTube video, you know, and it's right there, and it's talking me through things. So I would defer to a couple of a good YouTube video or some websites. Yeah. Yes?
I want to put in a plug for the You Bet Your Garden website.
Okay.
There's a radio program on NPR, and it's really early on Saturday morning.
6 a.m., I think.
6 a.m.
Yes.
But they do podcasts. You can go to that site and you can listen to podcasts there's an A to Z list on that website, and any kind of gardening issues you have, something you want to look up, go to their A to the Z list. It's just great.
Good. You bet your garden. You bet your garden. I'm glad to know it's a podcast because I have never been brave enough to get up at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Okay. Very good. Excellent. Another question.
I know there are things that need to be pruned now, but I'm not sure which things, or whether it's February or March or April. Roses, for instance, butterfly, crepe myrtle.
Yeah. Roses now? Yes. Something that blooms in the spring, do not do it now. Well, you can do it now, you just won't have any blooms. Things that bloom in the summer, go ahead and prune them up now. And again, the best thing I can say to you is go on the web, type in that plant that you're interested in, type in pruning, and you'll get directions because we could do hours on pruning. We could do hours on pruning. Pruning is one of those things I learned to do as a kid. It was just, I didn't know that people didn't know how to prune plants because we prune plants all the time. So I just thought that's what we did. And so for me, it's just second nature. I mean, I have people that call me up and say, come prune my plants now because I'll kill them. But you just remember, if it blooms in the spring, don't prune it now. Look in websites. Any other questions? Great. Terrific. Thank you.